So I'm usually very skeptical of creating these decks on blockchain. And one of the prime reasons for that is because by the time I'm finished writing the deck, things have moved on and things have changed. It's probably one of the fastest moving technologies of all time. And it has come such a long way since the time it was created. Its impact is supposed to be staggering and profound. In in my mind, at least, I've been associated with this space uh, since about 2014. And in my mind, it's not just the technology. We need to use it to kind of create a new way of doing business. And that is the focus of what we do with blockchain at Conduent. If you think about, our world, and this thing is not clicking. I don't know, where is it supposed to point? Okay. Can somebody flip the slides for me, please? Thank you. So if you think of our world, right, it is becoming more and more digital. Um, Digital is being woven into everything we do. Research by a firm, D-Scout, picked up a really interesting fact. A normal mobile phone user taps or clicks his phone or her phone 2,600 times a day. I think the number is simply staggering. And what we've also seen is there is an enormous increase in actual spend on the back of these digital interactions. According to Deloitte, this has gone up threefold in the past 5 years. Can we go to the next slide? And digital interactions are becoming the norm for institutions as well as their customers. Everybody is expecting platforms to be individualized. Every great experience sets the stage for the next great experience and the norm for the next great experience. Users' experiences are completely individualized, and that is kind of the expectation going forward. Users have come to expect immediate everything. Back in the day, when you listened to music, you had to kind of go into an orchestra hall, and you had to listen to it in person. That was the only way to consume music. We were dissatisfied by it. We put it in LPs, and we brought it into our homes. LPs weren't good enough because we couldn't carry them around, and we put them into iPods. And we said, the iPod can't carry everything I could possibly want to listen, and we switched to streaming media. And today, at the tap of a finger, you can pretty much play any soundtrack, watch any movie that was ever recorded. This notion of immediacy in content delivery is exploding to other areas, and users are experiencing sort of this need, which is being satisfied for everything to be immediate. And data is simply exploding. There is an absolute explosion in the amount of data that's available to computers to crunch through and create sort of meaningful insights, which is driving very, very deeply intelligent interactions with consumers. Can we go to the next slide? The next one, please. However, existing stewards of data have proven that they are incapable of sort of managing the data themselves, and the data management itself is broken. Certain brands that are actually over here have sort of disclosed. Target, for example, 110 million shopper records were exposed. Eternal Blue, which is sort of the code name of the NSA tool, was actually the software that was stolen out of the NSA in the United States. And that's sort of been used by many different hackers to create their next generation of hacking tools. Marriott stock sank about 6% on the day the hack was announced. And Equifax took 78 days to figure out that they'd actually been broken into, and another 138 days to actually fix that to fix that problem. Um, Existing stewards of data are sort of like being challenged in very, very interesting and difficult ways to manage the data. And what is actually happening is everybody is trying to protect data in their own silo. Can you go to the next one? So in our minds, blockchain addresses this broken data model. And it does so because it sort of attacks and addresses vulnerability at its core, with data being protected more at an attribute level. Historically, we built these massive firewalls around our systems, but once somebody made their way through the firewall, it was essentially, they could pick up any information that they wanted. Blockchain starts to change that model completely, and data is secured in a more at a more micro level. Command and control, which is basically stewardship of data, now resides across many different entities which are a part of that ecosystem. And that is what drives the ability to contain reputational damage. If other hotel brands were equally incentivized to ensure that records of Marriott were not stolen, because that would render them vulnerable as well, then this particular experience and event with Marriott would certainly not occur. And the whole network is incentivized to kind of contain the breach and recover from the breach. It is sort of these aspects of blockchain that start to make the technology really interesting. Can we go to the next slide? And one of the foundational principles of that is blockchain works in an ecosystem. Blockchain ecosystems are akin to road networks. In sort of a traffic system, you have roads, then you have traffic signs. All of them create a network inherently designed to make travel safe. As information, especially value, starts to move across blockchain networks, the standards for that information transfer are buried in the blockchain itself. The standards are governed by smart contracts that define how value can be exchanged between members of an ecosystem, that lets them exchange that value and information throughout that particular ecosystem. So in our mind, blockchain is successful when it's deployed in an ecosystem, and that is its core differentiator. Let's go to the next slide. And when you think about how an ecosystem, sort of comes together within the telco space, clearly there are multiple different participants within the telecom, sort of industry and the telecom space. All of them, come together to create an ecosystem. Blockchain starts to change that paradigm just a little bit, which is what we believe will enable that ecosystem to sustain and grow. And that is the creation of economic incentives and the ability to deliver those economic incentives to the various members of the telecom ecosystem. Let's go to the next slide. So what are we really talking about over here? Historically, you've had a network-centric ecosystem, where there is a network operator, and the network operator provides infrastructure to connect various members of that various players, to form that ecosystem. However, the network operator, in our mind, will transform into a data operator. The network operator can provide meaningful access to data for all members of that ecosystem, and you move from thinking about base stations and users and institutions to thinking about your buyers as participants on this new data-based ecosystem, banks and suppliers as other members that collectively come together, enabled by telecom-based infrastructure to make the ecosystem successful. And blockchain provides the way to ensure that economic incentives are delivered to these various members of that ecosystem. Let's go to a telco-facilitated value proposition on the next slide. There is sort of a range of possibilities. I'm focused on working in specific ways to make sure that we are able to deliver business transaction management within a blockchain-powered ecosystem facilitated by entities such as telecom operators. Because if you think about what a telecom operator actually has, it definitely has access to the handset, has access to certain specific characteristics of that handset, which allow a unique blockchain play to come together. By working with business application development companies such as Conduent, what the telco can actually do is facilitate unique, authenticated access to a blockchain-based business transaction management system. So what is actually happening on the telco side is you have cryptographic material, call it public keys, private keys, and so on and so forth, that because of the telco operator being in control of the phone's trust zone and the SIM card and so on and so forth, is able to sort of create the ability to authenticate a user. That is where that responsibility actually stops. And historically, what we've done is we've treated authenticated users as the final stage before business activities take place. But when you kind of do that, what ends up happening is you have to confirm, affirm, and do so repeatedly, effectively reconciling transactions across the many different entities and participants of the ecosystem that the transaction touches. Blockchain starts to do away with that, because once the user is actually authenticated into the system, the user is able to provide electronic signatures, materially different than what we do today. Within the blockchain-based ecosystem, a business user is actually signing away value. And before blockchain signatures are committed or accepted in the network, there is a consensus amongst the various nodes of a blockchain ecosystem that validates that signature, that ensures that the asset that is now being moved out of that particular user's control was actually owned by the user in the first place and has not been spent by that user in a preceding business transaction. Effectively, that electronic signature enables activities such as invoice approvals to occur. Once that invoice is approved, because the approval itself took place on a blockchain fabric, a blockchain data fabric, the payment can also be released a lot more seamlessly. The payment confirmation is also obtained on the blockchain ecosystem itself, thereby negating the need for this constant confirmation and affirmation and reconciliation across what I've drawn as just 4 nodes, but typically, as everybody knows, within sort of like this particular activity, there are a range of entities that come into the picture: buyers and suppliers, logistics providers, regulators, customs. The list kind of goes on and on. And today, everybody looks at it from a fragmented data perspective. But when they kind of are a part of a blockchain-based business transaction management ecosystem, that particular activity starts to become a lot more seamless. So again, in our minds, this is just one way of looking at the world. There are many, many others, and I believe there is no dearth of blockchain use cases. In fact, I'm sure in the past 13 minutes, another 20 were spun up in various different labs across the world. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in our mind, once again, to kind of re-emphasize this, it is not about technology. It's about a new way of doing business. These are technology-enabled platforms. They, by their very nature and by their inherent nature, will create more efficient business processes. But the mere focus on efficiency is not sufficient to sustain the deployment of these rather expensive and complicated technologies. I think something I read not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, said that the demand for blockchain developers has gone up by 517%. Regardless of how much discount you apply to 517%, the number is still staggering and still really, really big and meaningful. So there is a lot of demand which drives up the cost, and hence efficiency alone is not sufficient to warrant the deployment of blockchain. You have to kind of think about how can you facilitate the creation of rich and viable ecosystems that enable the creation of new lines of revenue. And that at Conduent is our focus. The next slide, please. We strongly believe that blockchain networks will transform and enable sort of trustless interactions between various members of ecosystems. And they will kind of drive the ability to share data and execute processes across trust boundaries. We are deploying that in a range of different areas, payments being one. And we are heavily focused on ensuring that we bring that to life in a very meaningful manner for the constituents and the partners that we have. Thank you so much.